Hello, I'm Bryony, and I never thought my family would go this far. They slapped me, demanded I give my penthouse to my sister, and yet I still believed things could be different. But when my Mafia boss husband walked in, everything changed. You won't believe what happened next. They thought they had control, but they didn't know who I was married to. I hadn't heard from my father in months, so when he called just before sunset, I knew something was off. His voice was too steady, too polite, like he was calling a client, not his youngest daughter. He asked me to come to a small family dinner. No reason, just dinner. I stood at the window of my penthouse in downtown Dallas, looking over the skyline I'd earned on my own terms. The air was thick, humid, golden light folding over rooftops. I hesitated, not because I didn't have time, but because I knew how these dinners went. I'd always been the one to smooth things over. The one to not cause trouble. The peacekeeper. The youngest. The easiest to override. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe they'd say something kind about the life I built, without a dollar of theirs. I put on a blazer, told myself, it's just dinner. But deep down, I knew, I was walking into something. The house looked the same, but smelled older, like furniture polish and unresolved arguments. The brick colonial stood in that familiar way, like it was waiting to correct me. Kayla opened the door before I even rang the bell. Her smile was stiff. "Still living in that skybox of yours?" she said, looking me up and down like she expected me to shrink. I didn't answer. Inside, Mom gave me a quick glance, then busied herself with something in the kitchen. Dad barely looked up from his glass of bourbon. I stood there for a moment, unsure where to put my hands. Nothing had changed. I remembered being 17, showing them my acceptance letter to Columbia. Kayla had just won a local business pitch contest and all Dad said was, "That's real achievement, Bryony." I stayed silent then. I stayed silent too many times. But not tonight. Not if I could help it. We sat around the old oak dining table like a staged photograph, everyone playing their part. Kayla launched into a story about some new investor she was charming. Mom nodded. Dad cleared his throat, then said, "Heard you bought a place." Kayla leaned forward, chin resting on her hand. "Yeah, Dad's been saying how crazy it is, just you in that big place. So much space. What's it, 30 floors up?" I felt my stomach tighten. "It's where I live," I said. "It's mine." Then Dad set his fork down and looked straight at me. "Kayla's thinking of settling down. Starting a family. That apartment makes more sense for her now." He said it like it was logistics. Like I was an error being corrected. "You know what they say, honey," he added with a thin smile. "Family helps family. Don't be selfish." I froze. My mouth went dry. The room blurred for a second. "It's under my name," I said, keeping my tone even. "I'm not giving it away." The silence came first. Then the slap. It wasn't dramatic, it was clinical. Just the sound of skin, a glass clinking in the background. My face turned before I could stop it. My own father had hit me. Kayla gasped, but stayed seated. Mom stared at her plate. And I couldn't move for a second. Not because it hurt, but because it said everything they'd never had the guts to say out loud. "Don't make things harder than they already are," Mom whispered. Like I was the burden. Like I was the one breaking this family apart. I stood up slowly, hands shaking, voice steady. "You just made sure I'll never come back here again." I walked out without looking back. Kayla muttered behind me, "You always make yourself the victim." Outside, the porch light buzzed. My cheek burned, but my eyes stayed dry. I walked to my car, opened the door, sat inside. In the mirror, I watched the house shrink behind me. I thought I'd left it years ago. Turns out, it never let go of me. As I drove off, one thought gripped tighter than the sting on my face. I thought that slap would end things. I had no idea, it was only the beginning. The red mark on my cheek was still faint, but it stung in a way that no cream or makeup could heal. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, tracing the outline of the bruise. It was barely visible, but I could feel it, like it had carved itself into my skin. I exhaled, watching my breath fog up the glass for a moment before the cool air from the AC cleared it away. I couldn't stop staring. It's funny how pain leaves slower than people do. My body had already adjusted to the loss, but the reminder would remain, lingering as my father's words echoed in my mind. I picked up my phone, seeing a new text from my mother. "Don't make things worse." Her message was short, distant, a single sentence, enough to tell me she was still on their side. The same side they'd always been on. I felt the bitterness well up, mixing with something else. Numbness, maybe. I thought I'd left this house behind for good when I bought the penthouse, but I realized then, standing in my own reflection, that I had never really left. Later that day, Kayla's name flashed on my phone. I was half tempted to ignore it, but curiosity and the unresolved anger pulled me back. "Dad wants us all for dinner tonight. Don't make it awkward." I could almost hear her smug tone through the screen. She had no idea how awkward things had already gotten. But I wasn't going to let her have the last word. I typed back a quick, "I'll be there." What else could I do? I wasn't going there to reconcile, I told myself. I was going because I wanted to see how far they'd go this time. To get a glimpse of the truth, buried deep under layers of silence and lies. People don't change, they just get better at hiding who they've always been. The restaurant was upscale, the kind where the light was soft and warm, casting a golden glow over everything. The kind where the piano music played just a little too softly to drown out the tension. I walked in, dressed in muted elegance, no flash, no loud colors. Just quiet, subdued. As I stepped inside, the hostess led me through the maze of tables, past people who looked up with polite curiosity before turning back to their conversations. I felt the eyes on me. But I wasn't supposed to be noticed, not really. I was seated near the restroom, in the corner. It wasn't exactly the worst seat, but it wasn't the one I was hoping for. Kayla and our parents sat at the main table, their voices too high-pitched and false to be real. The smile Kayla gave me when I walked in was tight, like she was forcing it to fit. "Still living in that sky box of yours?" she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. I didn't respond. I wasn't going to give her the satisfaction. But the feeling was already crawling up my spine. The familiar sting of being invisible. It was as if I were shrinking in their eyes, fading into the background. I knew my place in the family, I had always been the one to give in first. The peacekeeper, the one who made everyone feel better. But this time? This time, I wasn't going to bend. Small talk carried on around the table, but I wasn't listening. I was watching Kayla laugh a little too loud, watching my parents avoid my gaze, pretending everything was fine. They didn't have to pretend with me. They knew I saw through it all. And then it happened. Kayla, with her fake sweetness, casually mentioned, "Dad's been talking about that penthouse of yours." Before I could process what was happening, my father cut in. His voice, cold and measured, almost like he was reading from a script. "The apartment should go to Kayla now that she's settling down," he said. I froze. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced. The apartment? It wasn't just an apartment. It was everything I had worked for. Everything I had built without their help, without their approval. I tried to keep my voice steady. "It's under my name. I'm not giving it away." My heart was hammering in my chest, but I kept my hands still on the table. "You know what they say, honey," my father said, his eyes narrowing, "family helps family. Don't be selfish." I could feel the anger rising in my chest, hot and thick. My fists clenched under the table, but I didn't say anything. Not yet. Then came the silence. The kind of silence that cut through the air like a knife. I refused again, my voice barely more than a whisper. "I'm not giving it away." And that was when it happened. There was no warning, just the sharp slap that cracked through the silence. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I didn't say anything. The sound of glass clinking as it hit the table was followed by the sound of Kayla gasping, but she didn't move. She didn't say a word. My mother looked down, her eyes avoiding mine, whispering, "Don't make things harder than they already are." I could feel the heat of the slap on my skin, but it was the sting of betrayal that burned deeper. He didn't just slap me. He erased every word I had ever said, every choice I had ever made. It wasn't just a slap. It was everything. I looked at him, my father, the man who had never seen me. Not really. Not for what I had become. I didn't cry. I straightened my back, my chin lifted. You just made sure I'll never come back here again. I walked out of that house, the sound of Kayla's voice following me. You always make yourself the victim. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. Outside, under the porch light, my face stung. But my eyes? Dry. For the first time in a long while, I felt clear. I thought I left this house years ago. But as I stood there, my car key in my hand, the house behind me fading into the darkness, I realized, it never really left me. I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened the night before. The slap, the betrayal, the feeling of being erased. My reflection in the mirror this morning was a silent reminder of the life I had built, only to have it tossed aside by the very people who were supposed to support me. Sitting in my penthouse, I tried to focus on the task at hand. I opened my laptop, the soft glow of the screen cutting through the dimly lit room. It was late, too late, but I couldn't sleep. Not after last night. I'd been meaning to review my property documents for a while, but everything that had happened had pushed this to the back of my mind. The weight of my father's words, "The apartment should go to Kayla," kept echoing in my thoughts. I opened the files, scrolling through the digital copies of my property deed. I was looking for something that would help me understand what had gone wrong. That's when I saw it. A clause, hidden in plain sight. It contradicted everything my father had claimed. A part of the deed that stated the property was to be transferred upon certain conditions, conditions that I hadn't agreed to, conditions I hadn't even been informed about. The hair on the back of my neck stood up. But it wasn't just that. As I scrolled further, I found an amended version of the deed, uploaded just weeks ago, without my knowledge. The amendments were subtle, but they were there. And the name on both versions of the deed? Our family lawyer, Leo Carrington. My pulse quickened. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but something didn't sit right. I had to know more. Some betrayals don't stab you, they erase your signature. I sat there for a long while, staring at the screen, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. It was as if someone had stolen my voice and rewritten the narrative. I picked up my phone, scrolling through my messages, looking for something to distract me from the cold weight in my chest. I found an old voicemail from my father, saved months ago, just after I'd bought the penthouse. I played it again, my fingers trembling as I pressed play. Bryony, just finalizing things with Kayla. We'll need to wrap it up soon. At the time, I had thought it was just another family matter. I had ignored it, not wanting to deal with whatever they were scheming. But now, it clicked. They had been planning this all along. I could feel the disbelief turn into something sharper, colder. It was a betrayal, the kind you never see coming because it hides behind the ones you love. I replayed the voicemail a few more times, each word cutting deeper than the last. We often hear warnings in hindsight, but hindsight never saves us. It just haunts better. I couldn't just sit there anymore. I needed answers, but I also knew I had to be careful. They were all in this together. I decided to pay a visit to the law firm. I'd tell them I was just there to update a document, something routine. But I knew it was more than that. I needed to understand what was going on, and I wasn't going to get the truth sitting behind a screen. The next morning, I found myself sitting in the office of Leo Carrington's law firm. The receptionist greeted me with her usual friendly smile, and I gave her a polite nod, playing my part. "Can I help you with something, Ms. Locke?" "I'm here to update a document," I said, the words slipping from my mouth with a practiced calm. "Nothing major, just routine." The assistant led me back to an office, and I sat, flipping through a few papers on the desk while I waited. The silence was thick with tension, but I kept my composure. I couldn't let on how much I already knew. As we talked, I noticed the assistant's eyes darting toward the phone on her desk, her fingers tapping nervously. She was hiding something. Then came the slip-up. Casual, unthinking. "Oh, Kayla was here last week with your mom," she said, her voice too calm. They were finalizing some stuff for the penthouse. Kayla called it her investment property. My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't react. Instead, I smiled, pretending it didn't faze me. "Really?" I asked, keeping my voice steady. I wasn't aware. "Yeah," she continued, oblivious to my tightening grip on the edge of the desk. She's been handling a lot of the paperwork for it. Guess she's really got her foot in the door with everything now. I nodded, keeping my face neutral, even as a fire started to burn inside me. They thought I wouldn't fight back. They thought I would just accept what they were doing to me, like I always had. But this time, it was different. This time, I wasn't going to let them erase me. I left the office with a smile that didn't reach my eyes, my mind already racing. I had a plan, and it wasn't going to stop until I got what was rightfully mine. Back at my penthouse, I sat down at my desk and printed both versions of the deed. I stared at them for a long time, letting the weight of the situation sink in. This was it. I had enough evidence to fight back. But I wasn't just going to play their game. I opened my phone and sent a message to Lucan Miles, a legal contact I'd worked with in the past. He was one of the few people I trusted, someone who could help me turn this around. It was time to take control. Time to rewrite the ending. I pressed send. And then, I waited. The hours passed slowly, but around 3:17 a.m., I received his reply. One word. Meet. I didn't need to hear anything else. I was going to make them regret underestimating me. The afternoon sun poured through the blinds of my penthouse, casting long shadows across the floor. The city outside was quiet, the kind of calm that only comes before a storm. I sat in my living room, a cup of coffee in my hand, trying to steady my nerves. My thoughts drifted back to last night's dinner, the hollow, biting humiliation of being reduced to nothing. I glanced down at the notes I'd scribbled during my visit to the law firm the day before. Each line of text made my blood run cold. It was all coming together, and yet I still couldn't shake the feeling that there was more I wasn't seeing. The lawyer's name, the forged signatures, the property deed I'd never been told about. They thought I wouldn't fight back, but I wasn't about to let them take what was mine. I took a deep breath, staring at the screen in front of me, and just as I thought I might be able to find a little peace, my phone buzzed. It was Kayla. You coming tonight? She texted. Her tone was polite, but there was an edge beneath it, a sharpness I couldn't ignore. I sat there for a moment, staring at the message. I could ignore her, of course. I didn't have to go. But my curiosity got the best of me. I wanted to see how far they were willing to go, how deep the betrayal ran. I typed out my response without thinking twice. I'll be there. I didn't know if I was going for reconciliation, but I sure as hell wasn't going to let them think I was weak enough to be ignored. As the evening neared, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was a family message. Dress smart. Be at Talon's Club at 7 p.m. sharp. I knew it wasn't just dinner. The venue, the timing, it was a command. A reminder of their power. A reminder of how little I mattered to them unless I was useful. I felt the familiar unease tighten in my chest as I stood up, looking at my reflection in the mirror. The person who had walked out of that house yesterday was different from the one who had walked in. No longer hopeful. Now, I was cautious. Guarded. When someone tells you the dinner is just for family, check who's invited and who's not, I thought, adjusting my blouse. The sharpness of my own words stung more than I wanted to admit, but they rang true. I wasn't just a guest tonight. I was the token outsider, the one they could control when it suited them. I wasn't going to let them see how much it hurt. Talon's Club was everything it claimed to be, exclusive, polished, rich with the quiet hum of wealth and power. I walked in, the soft jazz music a stark contrast to the tension that gripped my every step. The maitre d' led me toward a private booth at the back, the table already set with glasses of wine and half-empty plates. The moment I entered, the lighting shifted, casting me in shadow while Kayla sat bathed in a soft, golden spotlight. I couldn't help but notice how the scene seemed to be designed for them, a showcase of their lives, while I was merely an observer, an accessory. I sat down, my stomach turning. I forced a smile, nodding in greeting to my parents, who barely made eye contact with me, and Kayla, who looked at me as though I were nothing more than an inconvenience. And then Kayla spoke, so casually it sent a shockwave through me. "We're moving into the penthouse next week," she said, her voice too sweet, too rehearsed. The words hit me like a punch in the gut. The room fell silent for a moment, but then a few polite murmurs broke out, people nodding, applauding softly, as if it were a grand announcement. My stomach dropped. They were turning my home into their showcase. And I was nothing but a ghost in it. I gripped the edge of my glass to steady my shaking hands. I excused myself to the restroom, the need to breathe and center myself overwhelming. The echo of their words, "We're moving in next week," swirled in my head. I stepped into the quiet restroom, my reflection in the mirror seeming almost alien. I touched the faint mark on my cheek, still there, a silent reminder of my father's slap. I was angry. I was humiliated. But more than that, I was done being passive. I dialed Lucan Miles, my trusted contact. He would help me, no matter what. "I need the deed file tonight," I said, keeping my voice calm. Lucan's voice on the other end was steady, promising to send the files over. He didn't need to ask questions. He knew what I needed, and he would deliver. As I ended the call, my phone buzzed again. It was Kayla. "Don't drag me down with you." Her words hit me harder than the slap. The thin veil between sister and rival had finally collapsed. The distance between us wasn't just emotional anymore. It was personal, and she had drawn the line in the sand. I walked back to the table, my mind sharp, focused. The dinner was no longer a family gathering. It was a game, a power struggle. Talon raised a glass, toasting to family solidarity. I forced a smile, lifting my glass to my lips, but in that moment, I knew. This was no longer about reconciliation. It was about survival. I placed my napkin on the table, a small but deliberate gesture that signaled my refusal to comply with their narrative any longer. Respect isn't given because of blood. It's earned with boundaries, I thought, quietly plotting my next move. They thought they could erase me, but they didn't know what they were dealing with. It was time to take control. It was time to rewrite the ending. That night, at 2 a.m., I opened my laptop and found the email thread between Talon and the property attorney. All of it signed before I had even realized. They had been planning this for months, and now, I had the proof. It was 2 a.m., and the soft glow of my laptop illuminated the kitchen. I had barely touched the cup of tea beside me. My mind was too busy, sifting through the avalanche of documents, emails, and hidden details I had uncovered. I clicked through the attachments again, each file more damning than the last. The property transfer documents, signed and altered, had been sitting in my inbox for weeks. My hands trembled as I scrolled through them, confirming what I already suspected. The first attachment was dated months ago, well before I even knew about the changes. That wasn't the worst part. No, the worst part was realizing the game they had been playing. The dinner, the slap, Kayla's casual announcement, it had all been choreographed. Every move, every word, calculated. They weren't just trying to take what was mine. They were erasing me. Gaslighting isn't just denial. It's choreography, I muttered to myself, staring at the screen. The words came out bitter, like a warning to my own reflection. The truth was right there, laid out in front of me, and still, I hadn't fought back. Not yet. But I would. The anger that had been simmering under the surface exploded in my chest. Betrayal stung deeper now, sharper than it had before. And with it, a new resolve. This wasn't just about taking back my home. This was about showing them that I wasn't someone they could control. I opened a new window on my laptop and typed in Lucan Miles' contact information. It was time to make a call. Lucan's voice crackled through the speaker, calm but strained. "They're moving faster than we thought," he said. "This is getting out of hand, Bryony." I could hear the weight in his voice, the urgency. He was someone I trusted, someone I'd worked with before, and his words made everything feel more real. He confirmed my suspicion. The transfer wasn't just some last-minute decision. It was planned. Everything had been arranged behind my back, and now I was left scrambling to catch up. "You need more than just proof," Lucan continued. "You'll need power. You have it, but you've got to use it." I listened carefully as Lucan outlined the legal steps. He could help me put a temporary hold on the transfer, but it required my signature. Fast. Noon tomorrow. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. As I ended the call, the adrenaline surged through me. This was it. No more hesitation. No more wondering if I should back down. I stood up, pacing. From daughter to warrior. The shift was palpable. I had been underestimated for the last time. They've underestimated me for the last time, I whispered aloud to no one but myself. The words were a promise. I arrived at my parents' house just before brunch. The sun had already reached its peak, casting harsh light on everything. The last time I'd been here, I was someone they could push around. Not anymore. The invitation had seemed innocent enough, a chance to talk things through, they said. But I knew better. This wasn't about peace. It was about control. I was led into the kitchen, where my mother was already sitting, smiling politely. Kayla was there too, her mask of warmth stretched too thin. As I took my seat, Kayla slid a folder across the table, a gesture that was as practiced as it was dismissive. "This is for your peace of mind," she said, as if she were offering me a gift. I didn't open it. Instead, I slid the printed emails from the law firm across the table, the weight of them dropping onto the surface with an unmistakable thud. "Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's just the calm before I burn your entire script," I said, my voice low and steady. The room went quiet. My mother's eyes flickered between the documents and my face, but she didn't speak. Kayla's expression shifted from feigned sympathy to something sharper, something that almost looked like a challenge. I could feel the anger rising in my chest, the tightness of my jaw. But I didn't let it show. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of seeing me break. Instead, I pushed the folder further away from me. Kayla's smirk faded into something colder, more predatory. After a few more moments of tense silence, I stood up, the room suddenly feeling much smaller than it had just minutes before. My mother reached for her teacup, pouring a fresh cup for me. I took the tea from her hand without a word, walked across the room to the window, and calmly poured it into the nearest plant. "That's how much I trust what you serve," I said, my voice flat, emotionless. I turned back to them, my eyes steady. "I'm filing a temporary injunction to freeze the transfer," I announced, the words echoing in the space between us. My father's face went pale, and Kayla's mask slipped entirely. Her expression morphed into a snarl, something feral behind her eyes. I walked toward the door, every step steady, even though my heart was pounding in my chest. I didn't look back, but I could feel the weight of their stares on my back. The first "no" is the loudest, I thought. After that, you never whisper again. When I got home, I barely took a breath before I sat down at my desk. My phone buzzed with an unfamiliar number, and I stared at it for a moment before answering. It was a package, a brown envelope with no return address. Inside, there was a photo of me from 10 years ago, and a note, "We know who really owns the truth." I felt a chill crawl up my spine, but I didn't flinch. I didn't back down. Someone else was watching, but now, I was ready. The envelope had arrived just after midnight. It was plain, unmarked, and felt heavier than it should have. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at it for what felt like forever. Inside, there was a photo of me, taken in a diner booth from 10 years ago, the night I met Ethan. A grainy, faded photo, but one that was unmistakably real. And there, just behind my smiling face, was a barely visible figure. It took me a second to focus, but when I did, my stomach dropped. Kayla. How long had she been following me? How much had she known? The sickening realization hit like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just a random photo, this was a message. Someone knew everything about me. Everything I thought was behind me. And they were using it against me. "Sometimes the ghosts you run from are still living, and share your last name," I whispered, the words heavy with fear and disbelief. The memory of our childhood, of her always being just a step ahead of me, twisted in my mind. How could I have missed this? How could I have thought she was just the sibling who had it all together? The jealousy, the subtle undermining, all of it had been leading to this moment. I was her target, and I hadn't even realized it until now. My hands shook as I placed the photo back in the envelope. I felt a coldness creep through me, my thoughts spiraling. Was this something Kayla had planned from the start? Had she been keeping tabs on me all these years? The nausea in my stomach intensified. Was I really just a pawn in their game? The phone buzzed beside me, breaking my trance. It was Lucan. I hesitated for a second before answering. Bryony, his voice was calm, too calm. They're moving faster than we thought. You need to act, now. His words cut through my fog of doubt. I had been on the edge of questioning everything. Maybe I was overreacting. Maybe I had misunderstood. But hearing Lucan's voice, his certainty, snapped me back into focus. I need your help, I said, the words out before I could think them through. Put a hold on the transfer, get me proof. I don't care what it takes. Lucan confirmed the steps. The urgency in his voice matched the pounding of my heart. I hung up, my fingers pressing into the edge of the table, holding myself steady. I had spent so much time questioning whether I was doing the right thing, second-guessing myself. But there was no turning back now. They've underestimated me for the last time, I whispered, the words a promise to myself. It was no longer just about the apartment. It was about showing them that I wasn't some quiet little sister anymore. I had a voice, and it would be heard. The next morning, I found myself sitting at my parents' house for brunch, trying to act as though everything was normal. But it wasn't. It hadn't been for a long time. My mother's smile was just a little too wide, her voice a little too sweet. Kayla, sitting across from me, couldn't hide the gleam in her eyes. They had invited me here under the guise of talking things through. But I knew better. This was never about peace. This was their way of wrapping me back up in their control. Kayla slid a folder across the table toward me. This is for your peace of mind, she said, trying to sound kind, but the insincerity was thick in her voice. I didn't open it. Instead, I took the printed emails I had brought with me and set them down in front of her with a quiet thud. The room fell silent, the weight of the moment sinking in. Silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's just the calm before I burn your entire script, I said, my voice steady but cutting. Kayla's mask slipped. For a moment, I saw the rage flicker behind her eyes. Her polite demeanor faltered, replaced by something darker, more dangerous. I wasn't just fighting for a home anymore. This was about reclaiming the narrative, about not letting her or anyone else rewrite my story. You can't do this, she snapped, her words sharp. I didn't flinch. I'm filing a temporary injunction to freeze the transfer, I said, my tone unwavering. Her eyes narrowed, but she didn't say anything. My father, who had been silent up until that point, looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and anger. His face reddened, but he didn't speak either. I stood up, took the cup of tea my mother had poured for me, and walked across the room, carefully pouring the tea into the nearest plant. That's how much I trust what you serve, I said, not even glancing back. The silence that followed was thick, suffocating. It was the moment they realized I wasn't going to be silent anymore. I turned to face them one last time before leaving, my heart pounding, but there was no fear. Only the rush of reclaiming control. When I got home, I barely stepped inside before my phone buzzed again. This time, it was an unknown number. I answered without hesitation. A deep breath before the voice on the other end came through. Bryony, you've made your move, but it's just begun. The voice was cold, calculated. I stared at the phone in my hand, disbelief washing over me as the words sank in. This was no longer just about my family. It was about something bigger. Something darker. I was in their sights. But I was done playing their game. The meeting took place in the late afternoon, with the city skyline shimmering through the large windows of my penthouse office. The sun was low, casting a warm, golden light across the room, but the warmth didn't reach me. I was cold, calculating. This was the moment we had been working toward, a moment of power that was no longer in their hands, but mine. Lucan and Silas sat across from me, both of them grim and focused. The quiet hum of the city below was a constant backdrop, but the only sounds that mattered now were the ones we were making. Bryony, Lucan said, his voice steady but with an underlying urgency. We've traced the funds. The deed changes were made months ago, right after your father first began his talks with Kayla. I nodded, my mind clicking into place. It wasn't just a matter of ownership, it was a matter of timing. They had been planning this for a long time, and I had been oblivious, caught up in the noise. Silas? I turned to him. Silas leaned forward, tapping his fingers against the table. I've got backups from my network. We've got evidence of the transfers, the communications, everything. They can't hide it anymore. I stood up, looking out the window at the city below. No more shadows, only decisions. I had spent too much time in the shadows, hiding, waiting for things to fall into place. But now, I was ready. I wasn't just going to sit back and let them dictate the terms of my life. I was about to take back control. Later that evening, I found myself standing in the familiar, darkened hallway of Talon's private club. The air was thick with wealth, but it felt suffocating rather than comforting. The soft jazz in the background only made the tension in the room feel more real. This time, I wasn't a guest. I wasn't just an observer, a pawn in their game. I was a contender. Talon stood at the front of the room, a glass of champagne in hand. He raised it to the crowd. Tonight marks the beginning of a new venture for our family. Kayla's moving into the penthouse next week, and we're starting fresh. The words hung in the air like a challenge. A proclamation. It was supposed to be a celebration. But for me, it was a declaration of war. I stood and raised my glass. I'll drink to that, I said, my voice steady and loud enough to cut through the crowd. But instead of toasting, I pulled out the deed. The one they had tried to take from me. The one they thought they could erase. The transfer is frozen, I announced. This property is mine, and it's not going anywhere. The room went dead silent. Silas, who had been standing beside me, stepped forward, presenting the legal documents to the crowd. The evidence was irrefutable, the signatures, the timing, the dates. There was no question now. Talon's face went pale. Kayla, standing nearby, shot me a look that was pure fury. But it didn't matter. The truth was out, and there was no going back. The crowd murmured, the atmosphere shifting from celebration to shock. I could feel the satisfaction in my bones, but there was also something else, a bitter clarity. They had tried to steal from me, and I had taken it all back. The room buzzed with whispers, but I wasn't listening anymore. I had already won. Lucan projected documents onto the big screen, showing email logs, financial donations, and forged signatures. It was undeniable. The deal had been rigged from the start. Kayla's voice broke through the murmurs. That's not how business works, she snapped, but no one was listening to her anymore. I looked at her, seeing her in a way I never had before, not as my sister, but as a rival. As the enemy. You gave me nothing except a guarantee I'd stay silent, I said, my voice cold. I'm breaking that contract now. Her face twisted, but I didn't care. All the years of being the little sister had led to this moment. It was no longer about family. It was about me taking back what was rightfully mine. The evening ended, but my mind was still racing. Silas and I stepped out into the cool night air, walking silently to the rooftop terrace of the club. Dallas sprawled before me, the lights twinkling in the distance. It should have felt like a victory, but there was something else creeping in. Something that made the triumph feel like the beginning of a larger game. I stood there for a long moment, taking in the view. The betrayal, the losses, the nights I had cried alone, they all weighed heavily on me. But for the first time, I felt something new, ownership. Not just of the property, but of my life. They tried to write the final chapter for me, I said to Silas, my voice low. Now I'm writing it myself. Silas didn't answer, but his presence was enough. We didn't need words. We stood there together, the city lights flickering below, knowing that this battle wasn't over. And as I looked out over the city, I realized their move wasn't the last, it was the opening gambit.